And tell us about, what led you to become a judge and in what court you presided over and all that stuff. So we'll get a little better sense of who Anna von Reitz is.
Okay, well, like I said, I'm probably the least interesting of any topic we could discuss. I grew up in the Midwest, basically am a scientist at heart. I studied hard science in school, and I maintained my interest in science and mathematics. I got involved in law because it was a necessity simply to survive in this crazy condition that they've created. A person needs to know a lot of law in order to defend your property and your rights and just to live in this society, because they've made such a complete and utter bollocks of it. So I got involved by a 17-year fight with the Internal Revenue Service. And in the course of that long battle, I learned many, many things. And the more I learned, the more I researched, the more I was drawn into doing something about it. Because I knew flat out at the end of all that the American public was being defrauded, lied to, and victimized by crime syndicates that are operating on our shores in violation of any treaty allowing them to be here.
You know, I see a picture of the, American Gothic. And there's a sign there that says, something is wrong when, ... an American affidavit of probable cause. What does that mean?
An affidavit of probable cause is what you swear out when you are aware of a crime being committed. You go in and you go to the district attorney or the sheriff or whomever, and you say, hey, I'm aware of a crime that's been committed, or I'm aware of something that looks like it's a crime. Okay? And you go in and you give it to the sheriff, or you give it to the troopers, whomever, the U.S. Marshals, the FBI, whoever. And then they are responsible for going forward and prosecuting and investigating and bringing it before a grand jury and doing everything that's supposed to be done to uphold the rule of law. And you, as a private man or woman that is aware of a crime, are absolutely responsible for reporting it. If you know of a crime and you have reasonable proof that it's occurred, and you don't go in and let the powers that be know, then you become an accomplice to the crime.
Yeah.
So my husband and I had researched this material, and as we did so, as unbelievable as it seemed when we first started, it grew upon us that, yes, indeed, this is crime, and it is happening, and, yes, here is reasonable proof, and the evidence is compelling enough so that we cannot sit here any longer and pretend that we are not sure about this. We have to go forward. We have to report this as crime to the authorities. So that's what we did. We went to the FBI. We went to the troopers. We went to in Alaska, the troopers are like the sheriffs. We went to regulatory agencies. We reported it to the court. And nothing happened. Nothing. No response at all from anybody, anywhere. The FBI would not, even though they're charged with securities fraud and interstate banking fraud and everything else, they didn't do anything. sat on their thumbs. And as for the troopers, they just kind of looked at me like, well, hey, this isn't our bailiwick. This is above our pay grade. So, after you've reported it, and nothing is done, and there's no public acknowledgement that there's anything wrong, you still have the responsibility of reporting the crime. Okay?
Yeah.
So, our book there, something is wrong when, an American Affidavit of Probable Cause, is our public affidavit of probable cause, giving the entire background and then the affidavit at the end of the book, telling the world, look, this is crime. It's being committed here in America. Nobody can say that we didn't report it. We're doing our public duty.
Yeah. All right. This is extraordinary. You have Disclosure 101. You have two books. I mentioned this before you came on. Disclosure 101 and Something is Wrong When, and then an American Affidavit of Probable Cause. All the links are in Guest Media, people. You know that. But otherwise, if you're not a member and you're just listening, if you're not a member of Caravan, then go to Amazon. That's the place. And you have 293 links with downloadable PDFs. Everything from Notice to Congress, My Dear Archbishop George, The Nut is Cracked, For a Deeper Understanding. These are all individual downloadable writings. Open Letter to Karen Hughes, Final Judgment and Civil Orders. If you go through this, says before you begin your studies, read this introduction. You can use the search feature below to search either on this website or on the entire internet for keywords associated with your interest. XQuick does not record your IP address or connect it with any of what has been searched for. So that's very, very cool. And it goes all the way down to a statement of fact for the Bundy family in Nevada. That's just number 48 of 293. And then you have Dear John, regarding the IRS. And then you have Top 5 Banking Acts, United States of America, Inc., released from bankruptcy, July 1st, 2013. Judge, this is monstrous. What is wrong with everybody? Why has it taken this long for people to figure it out? We talked with John Wayne's grandson, John T. Wayne, last week, and he was saying many of the same things. And I asked him, can you prove this? And he just held up the documents and kind of pushed them over to the camera like, can you see these? So it appears to be on the level. But what do you do with the population of ignoramuses who do not care? They just want their next buzz or their next romp or their next drink or their next paycheck, whether they earned it or not. What do you do with a lethargic, recidivistic public?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to give Americans more credit. We have been dumbed down. We've been kept purposefully ignorant so as to better plunder us for 2 generations. And the fact that so many people are in a stupor is partly because our public school system has been deliberately infiltrated and tweaked and motivated to keep us in a stupor.
Okay, well, I feel a little bit better about us, but not much.
Okay. And then the rest of it, economically, we've been enslaved, and we've had the value of our labor stolen from us to such an extent that women have had to enter the workforce just to keep their families alive, and that has helped to destroy the quality of family life and to keep us all running in circles and to keep us exhausted so that there's no additional time or any kind of leisure in our lives where we might learn the truth and dig up the facts and realize what's happened. And the third thing is that we're kept constantly vaguely afraid. We're constantly bombarded with media propaganda that is designed to do anything but educate or uplift or make any positive difference in our lives. Back in 1989, my husband went on a fishing trip with our oldest son, and I was left at home alone at the house for a week. And I thought, oh, goody, I finally get to clean all the gunk out of the garage, right?
Yeah.
So I'm having my girl's delight and cleaning the garage during the days, and then at night I'd come in and I'd sit down and do what had always been my habit, like for millions of Americans, watch the nightly news, right? Isn't that what we all have done all our lives, is watch the nightly news with Walter Cronkite or with Dan Rather or, whoever. And so I started this evening. I was bored, and I just had a piece of paper and a pen, and just for the curiosity, it kind of tweaked me. I thought, well, I'm going to keep track and see how many of these stories are about sex and how many are about death. And how many are about both sex and death. Okay? So I've got these 3 columns on my little tally sheet. I'm sitting there, I'm watching the news, and I'm checking it off. If the story was just primarily about sex, it went in the sex column. And if it was just about death, it went in the death column. And if it involved both, it went in the both column. And at the end of the day, I realized something rather astounding. Virtually all of those stories involved either sex or death or both. And there was precious little in the other column that stood for all the other different topics and things that might come across the airwaves. Well, this really got my curiosity up. I thought, oh, this can't be true. I'm going to check this out again. And so for that entire week, while my husband was off on his fishing trip, I was keeping a tally. He got home and I showed him the results, and he was absolutely amazed. It was like, oh, what? You mean to tell me that they're feeding us a constant stream of nothing but sex and death, and that it has nothing to do with anything practical related to our lives? It's all stuff that we can't do anything about, and there's no connect here. And there's no explanation why one murder in L.A. gets reported and hundreds of others of murders all over this country don't. And, hey, what's going on here with our media? So then we made it into a game. And for the next, 2 or 3 months, my husband and I and a couple other couples were monitoring the different major media outlets, ABC, NBC, CBS, and we were each keeping track of the same kind of tally of sex, death, or both. And, what was the relative percentages of what they were feeding us on TV and the nightly news every night. It was over 90%, and I mean like 98% of just sex and death. Repeated over and over and over and over, with very little or no connection to anything that you could do about it, or anything that was important to keeping you or your family safe, or anything else. In other words, it was just negative, ugly pablum that was being spewed on national airwaves for no apparent reason other than to make you feel afraid and depressed. Now, you have to stop and think, well, why would the media have a vested interest in making people feel scared and depressed? Well, number one, when you're scared, you call for more government services. You want the government to come in and protect you, right? That's the only reason you have a government. So by promoting this constant sense of fear, the media promotes a need for more government services. And you have to remember that the government that we have, such as we have, is a governmental services corporation. So they are in the business of providing governmental services, selling you governmental services, just like Joe Blow sells you widgets. This propaganda through the media is a subversive, quiet form of advertising for these corporations that are in the business of selling us governmental services, because it makes us afraid. That makes us demand more services. It's pretty obvious once you start thinking about it. And then the other part of it, the death is the scary part, and the sex is, stimulating your adrenal cortex and increasing your adrenaline flow, which does what? It makes you hungry. It makes you restless. It makes you want to go out and consume things. It makes you want products. Okay?
Yep.
And so here you are. It's the end of your day. You sit down in front of the TV. You turn this thing on, and you listen to this, and you get up, and you're feeling hungry, restless, unhappy, slightly scared. Nothing's right in your world. And this has been brought to you by the Nightly News Service. Hello?
Yeah.
I turned off my television, and I swear to you that except for things like, a concert or something of that ilk, or maybe a movie now or then, I haven't turned it back on since like 1989. Zip. I haven't watched the nightly news since 1989.
Well, do you feel like you missed anything?
Nope. I'm absolutely sure I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm healthier, I'm happier, and what news I get filters through from, glancing at a newspaper here or there, and I'm just fine, thanks. I don't need that in my life.
Well,
that's just an example.
It's interesting that at least faith in TV news and newspapers has just plummeted. So maybe a lot of people are just turning away from it because it's just so blatantly obvious that they're doing what they're told. I observed many years ago that, you look at the three major networks, or four if you want to count Fox. In those days, you didn't really. They were up and coming then. But so, okay, the four newscasts, and certainly the big three, I think they're still ABC, CBS, and NBC. It's almost as though these news presenters are reading from the same script. I mean, it's almost word for word what the other two networks are saying. Let's see, what does that tell us? It tells us that they think that we're so stupid that we will always watch this network, or we will always watch that network. We're going to find that friendly face that we can trust, that we trust to give us the news, give us the truth. But, you throw three screens up there and you see they're all saying the same thing. That just tells me it's nothing but propaganda, and obviously it is.
Yeah, well, one of my first jobs was as a print setter, copy setter for a little hometown newspaper. Back in the days when we used to throw hot lead, we'd have to put things in wooden cases, actual lead slugs in wooden cases, and tamp them down and set the page and run it on a real printing press.
Imagine that, yeah.
Yeah, well, I got real good at seeing things upside down and backwards, because that's the way you have to do that process. But anyway, the industry has vastly changed, but one of the things I learned in that context is that our entire media system has been under government gag orders since the Second World War, and it's never been released.
Let me ask you this, Judge. You're a judge, so I have to ask this. Can you prove this?
Prove that they're under a government gag order?
Yeah.
Just ask the National Press Club.
Okay.
Just write them a nice letter and put it to them.
All right.
They will at least privately admit it. And I believe that there is a actual act in Congress that gave them the power, though it didn't exactly say it. It's been like paying your income tax is voluntary. Well, so is the newspaper compliance with the government regulators. But every major news organization has their own little Politburo. And that's why you see the sameness in the news coverage.
Well,
that's all linked.
That makes perfect sense. It really does. When you observe something, but nobody will say anything about it, and you continue to observe it, then you know that it's like Voltaire said about it. If you want to find out who really runs you, just figure out who it is you can't criticize, and then you'll know who controls you, who's really running things. And it's the same method of determining. Gee.
Right.
Carry on.
Well, and on top of that, over the last 20 years, there's been this massive consolidation of our news organs. All of our news media organs, virtually all of them, are being owned and or ownership controlled by only 6 multinational corporations, all of which belong to foreign interests. Now, how much sense does it make for us Americans to let these foreign companies come in here and control our news media? Hello? That's a national security breach of the first order. And yet, we've done it. We've let Ted Turner come in here. We've let Time Warner come in here. We've let Reuters come in here and buy up our news media and chain us to a propaganda machine that is foreign-owned and foreign-controlled and foreign benefit motivated. Now, on one hand, I believe that there should be competition. On the other hand, I believe it's a national security issue for America to have a free press.
Well, you certainly would think so.
Yeah. An American press in America. Think about it. Does a British-based operation have our best interest at heart? You'd better believe they don't. No, it's crazy. Rupert Murdoch, an Australian, owns Fox. Now, I'm not saying that the Aussies are bad people. I'm not saying that the Brits are bad people. I'm saying that these are multinational corporations that don't necessarily care about America. And they are running everything that we hear in the media. Now, am I the only one that strikes as dangerous?
Core.
I mean, just flat out dangerous?
Yeah. No, I don't think you are the only one. And the deal about it's now legal, or the restriction on broadcasting information that is patently propaganda. Is it true that restriction was lifted completely in 2013, and now the U.S. government is free to issue all the propaganda that it wants? Or, these stories...
Well, they issue propaganda all the time.
Yeah. But,
90% of what I see come out of D.C. is just more propaganda. I saw another big clump of it come out this morning. People, just line up and seem to buy into all this Shinola. It's time for us to really kind of get the skepticism of our grandparents' generation. The people that came through the 1930s, they had all of these sayings like, don't take any wooden nickels, and you got to know the cow patty from the Shinola, the shoe polish. Well, it's time we got that back and started thinking. I mean, there's just this morning there was an article that came over my desk, people that are concerned writing to me, and it was about U.S. Supreme Court opens the door to a police state by saying that policemen could plead that they made a mistake in violating a person's rights, and therefore it was all okay because they made a mistake. Wink, wink. Well, that's been going on for a long time. And I've got a couple of things to say about that may be a little bit of a shock to your listeners. But number one, the U.S. Supreme Court is only supreme over the federal apparatus and corporation. It's not supreme over the people. It's not now, never has been. You'd have to think that our ancestors were completely crazy to turn around and fight a war and go through all that they went through and then just hand their authority over to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Never made sense to me.
No, and it isn't true. The U.S. Supreme Court interprets the Constitution for the federal government, period. It applies to federal officials, federal employees, and nobody else. Okay? The U.S. Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, which is known as the supreme law of the land. Okay? I want you all to think about that. Think about who is saying that. The federal government apparatus, federal officials, federal employees, who are all tasked with doing jobs that are in the international jurisdiction of the sea, called the Constitution the supreme law of the land. Why do they do that? It's because when they come ashore on our soil, that's the agreement they have to abide by. Okay? On the land, we have a continental Congress, okay, that operates the land jurisdiction of this continent. That is the Congress that matters on our soil. That thing in D.C., the United States Congress, is a completely separate and different animal. It is charged with operating 19 enumerated different services, all of which, with the possible exception of the Interstate Commerce Clause, have to do with functions that are all in international jurisdiction of the sea. Every single one of them. And even the Interstate Commerce Clause, which is often abused, actually limits the federal government to expediting trade and regulating it so as to promote trade, free trade, among the states. That's what it's there for. That's why it exists. Now, they embellish upon that, and they use it to tinker and fool around and try to get more business for themselves. But that is the only little tiny juncture or joinder between what they do and what our actual government on the land is supposed to do.
Oh, boy.
So, this whole idea that because the U.S. Supreme Court says something, that's, gospel and law and God coming down from on high, that's a bunch of hokum. That's a lie. And people need to realize that the powers of the U.S. Supreme Court apply only to the federal government and its organization, its employees.
Well, how did they manage to ram Obamacare down our throats along with gay marriage?
The same way they have rammed the IRS, the Internal Revenue crap down our throats. We let them.
Yeah,
we let them.
That's it, isn't
it? We do that. Again, that thing in Washington has control only over its own citizens and its own officials, its own employees.
The government apparatus.
The government apparatus. And the crying thing is that we, have, in our slumber, let these freebooters come in and make false claims against us and against our identity. We've allowed identity theft and fraud through ignorance on a vast, vast scale. There is a company called the United States Corporation Company, and I just happened to have its, it was formed in July of 1925 in Florida. And it is listed as the registered agent for your name.
I don't get it.
Now that's because they have created corporate franchises and named those franchises after each and every one of us without our knowledge or permission. And we are the original holders in due course of our given name and everything else associated with us. But they have copyrighted our names, created franchises for themselves in our names, and this is the company that is supposedly our registered agent. The United States Corporation Company. File number 100009, registered in the state of Florida. You can look up their articles of, it's a for-profit articles of incorporation.
All right.
And see it for yourself.
Yep.
And on every mortgage note, you will find that they are listed as the registered agent. And another real interesting thing that you will find once they've processed these things, if you sue for it, you'll find that the bank that you thought you got your loan from is listed as the borrower's name and address, and you, this corporation they've named after you, that is the lender's name and address. They are taking your credit and they are interposing themselves as middlemen. They take your promissory note, they convert it into a security note, then they issue certificates, then they sell the certificates to PIMCO, or one of the other big bond companies, and the bonding companies sell these on the stock market to investors. So what they are advertising a home loan and a mortgage, but in fact it's a conduit loan, and they're misrepresenting all of this. It's blatant fraud. It's fraud on the court. It's accounting fraud. They never de-recognize your asset, ever. That it's actually they're using your credit for them to borrow against.
Yeah.
And that they're the actual ones that are holding the mortgage. And they're the ones in default.
Is that why? Now, this may be a little bit of a stretch, Judge, but I want to ask this question as simplistic as it may seem. Maybe it is simplistic. But is this why people who are not loaded up with debt, who have no credit to speak of because they buy things with cash, meaning they just pay for it and they don't buy things on time, as the old expression goes, is this why these people are not credit worthy?
Who would want or need credit when you're the source of credit?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I haven't had a credit card in at least 10 years, maybe more. I can't even remember when last time I tore up the swindle sheet and said goodbye to that. And yet I now understand that the average American is carrying $50,000 or more in credit card debt at anywhere between 12 and 18% interest per annum. Let me tell you, folks, there's no way to get out from underneath the debt like that. It just keeps rolling.
Yeah.
It becomes the equivalent of a house payment very rapidly. And, you know, suddenly you're carrying 2 mortgages, 3 kids, 2 cars, 3 jobs. How are you supposed to be able to take care of yourself or have a life? You're a slave. You're doing nothing but work for the government, the government, the government. And the government is nothing but this gigantic, it's a governmental services corporation, and the job of selling you more services. So you asked about Obamacare. I call it Obamacare. And, you know, here they are. They're trying to use the mechanisms of the Internal Revenue Service to go out and collect on this supposed health care insurance.
Okay.
It's nothing but a gigantic scam. The Internal Revenue Service and the American Bar Association are both owned and operated by a company called the Northern Trust Incorporated that's under liquidation. They're nothing but bill collectors, international bill collectors. And who are they collecting against? Interestingly enough, they're not collecting against you, the living man or woman. They're collecting against these bogus franchise corporations that the governmental services corporations set up to benefit themselves. It's the all capital letters name, the straw man that they're collecting against.
Let me just read a little something here. I want to know if you agree with this or not. This comes from a site called serendipity.li. And it says, the date is February 21st, 1871, and the 41st Congress is in session. I refer you to the Acts of the 41st Congress, Section 34, Session 3, Chapters 61 and 62. On this date in history of our nation, Congress passed an act titled, An Act to Provide a Government for the District of Columbia. This is also known as the Act of 1871. What does this mean? Well, it means that Congress, under no constitutional authority to do so, created a separate form of government for the District of Columbia, which is a 10-mile square parcel of land. What? How could they do that? Moreover, why would they do that? And it says, to explain, let's look at the circumstances of those days. Act of 1871 was passed at a vulnerable time in America. Our nation was essentially bankrupt, weakened, and financially depleted in the aftermath of the Civil War. And the Civil War itself was nothing more than a calculated front for some pretty fancy footwork by corporate backroom players. It was a strategic maneuver by European interests, the international bankers, who were intent upon gaining a stranglehold on the neck and the coffers of America. Is this correct?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, the Congress did have the right to set up a separate government for the District of Columbia because the Constitution gave the plenary power to Congress to do so.
All right.
Okay, it was a weak point in the Constitution, and the Congress found it, and they squeezed through.
Okay.
I believe Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Okay, so they did have the right to set up a separate government for the District of Columbia, period. We gave them that. The Act of 1871, it's been around in patriot circles forever, and the importance of the Act of 1871 is it shows intent. But the fact of the matter is that it was repealed in 1874. Okay, so all this hoo-ha about the Act of 1871 kind of goes mute at the point that you realize, oh, well, you know, down the line here, they repealed it. But then, okay, the Act of 1871, which was Chapter 62, 16, Statute 419, was repealed in 1874, but then they passed it piecemeal, and they went through a series of different steps to get to the same result. And so then they passed, finally, an act providing a permanent form of government for the District of Columbia, Chapter 180, Section 1, 20 Statute 102 on June 11, 1878. So it was actually the Act of 1878 that formed the government for the District of Columbia. To remain and continue as a municipal corporation brought forward from the Act of 1871, as provided in the Act of March 2, 1877, amended and approved March 9, 1878, revised statutes of the United States relating to the District of Columbia, 1873 to 74, was amended, and then it was brought forward again. The Act of June 28, 1935, 49 Statute 430, Chapter 332, Section 1, which then translates to Title I, Section 102, District of Columbia Code, 1940. Washington, D.C. and the District of Columbia have their own law. It's called District of Columbia Code, or Municipal Code. And it costs you about $800 last time I looked just to get a copy of their code. But that is the law form that an awful lot of the action against us has been taken. If you really want to dig into the dirt of what this government has done, what the corporate arm of the government has done, you have to get into the District of Columbia Code, and you have to start really digging through that. Now, when you look at the intent of all this, given that the District of Columbia was actually set up in 1790 and was fully chartered by 1801, the aim of the Act of 1871 is, as it appears, merely to set up the United States Corp.
Gotcha.
Okay? So they created a government by the name of District of Columbia, and they constituted it as a body corporate for municipal purposes, a municipal corporation. And in Britain, they did the same thing with the Municipal Corporations Act of 1888, which took England and Great Britain into it took England into Great Britain, and then Great Britain further morphed into the UK. Okay, so anyway, the same thing that happened here happened in Britain. It happened in Congress, in Canada, in Australia, throughout Europe. The same pernicious change from a government of the people and by the people and representing living people was transformed into a government of the corporation, by the corporation, and for the corporation. And the obvious reason for this was money and coercive power. These corporations have taken over, and this is how they did it. They enfranchised everyone. This actually started with Benjamin Disraeli and Queen Victoria back in the 1860s, at about the same time that the Civil War in America was being fought. This whole thing was being moved forward by international banking interests. And so in Britain, we had the Enfranchisement Act. And in America, we had the Reorganization Act. And so these things are all being orchestrated at a high level by what are called the higher contracting powers. And essentially, it's a bunch of old men sitting around in the back rooms and clubs deciding how they're going to rule the world and how they're going to organize everything. And they've done a lousy job of it. They've made incredible profit for themselves, and they have enslaved and acted as predators and as very venal criminals with respect to everybody else.
Gotcha.
And they're responsible for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, now where does that leave us as the so-called citizens? I mean, are we citizens or, well, you got me. We're not.
We're not.
And then, go ahead.
The word citizen, we use it all the time. We use it colloquially. We use it in kind of the vernacular of just common speech. We talk about ourselves as citizens, but we're not. And this is something that we've got to train ourselves away from. A citizen, strictly speaking, is either an elected official or a public employee. And if you're not one of those two things, you're not a citizen. A citizen owes their allegiance to the government and is subservient to the government. So if you want to serve the government, you can adopt the status of being a citizen. But if you want the government to serve you, then you have to assert your natural birthright standing and stand here on your little flat feet and say, no, I am an American state national. I am a Virginian. I am a North Carolinian. I am a Wisconsinite, a Minnesotan, a Californian, a Texan, an Idahoan. That's your actual nation. This country is set up and composed of 50 nation states. The states are the only sovereign entities that were ever created. That thing in Washington, D.C. is not a sovereign government with respect to us, and it never has been. Ever. It's an association of states. It's a club. It's a group effort to put up a united front against the rest of the world in terms of trade and defense and that sort of thing. That's what it was designed to do. And it's under a contract to perform those duties. But that's it. There is no sovereign government in D.C. The sovereign government is here on the land of each one of the different states. So when you look at Texas or you look at Oklahoma, you are looking at the actual sovereign state. That's your nation. That's what you are part of.
Wow. And so, you advocate the need for people to expatriate from the United States and come back to their birthright status as an American state national. Is that correct?
Yep.
And how is...
And what...
Go on. Sorry.
What that really means when I say American state national, that's just a general description of what I just said, that you're a Virginian, you're a Floridian, you're a Rhode Islander. And I absolutely, I say expatriate, and do it now. Make it clear.
How is this done? I mean, how do you do it?
An act of expatriation, which the simplest act of expatriation is declaration that you do not give your allegiance to the United States and are not a United States citizen. Now, the United States can have citizens because it's a corporation, right?
Yeah.
And that's what it did in 1868 with its corporate charter, which it deceptively called the Constitution for the United States of America, or of the United States of America, pardon me. They put this document out there, and it's very confusing. It's meant to be confusing. our actual Constitution, our agreement, the original equity contract that set up the federal government and allows the federal government to exist, is called the Constitution for the United States of America. Okay?
Yeah.
In 1868, this corporate entity was gathered together by the Congress, and they published their federal corporation charter as a document called the Constitution of the United States of America. And it looks very much like the original equity contract, but it's not an equity contract. It's a corporate charter. You know, over the years, there have been a lot of complaints saying, well, look, we have absolute proof here that, for example, the 16th Amendment was never ratified by the states. The 14th Amendment was never ratified by the states. And the 13th Amendment was never ratified by the states. In fact, nothing since the 12th Amendment that is in the United States, the Constitution of the United States of America, none of those amendments have been properly ratified by the states. And there are volumes, reams of research that's been done to conclude that no, none of these amendments were ever properly ratified by the states of the Union. That's right, they weren't. You know why? Because they're not amendments to the actual Constitution.
Gotcha.
They're amendments to a corporate charter. And as a corporate charter, they're bylaws. They can be amended by a vote of the Congress. So that's what happens. They make up all these amendments and they add them to their corporate charter, and then the rest of us are bamboozled into thinking that those are amendments to our Constitution when actually they're amendments to their Constitution.
So, just to restate, is income tax voluntary or not?
For the vast majority of us, it's voluntary. Absolutely 100% voluntary, no doubt about it, voluntary or not, you know. The federal corporation started the income tax and applied it to federal employees and public officials, and the rationale was that you were getting paid out of the public purse, and so you owed something back to the public. So if you are a federal civilian employee, if you're active duty military, and then there are 4 other categories of people or persons that have to pay federal income tax. Welfare recipients, people that are actually on the public dole, have to pay federal income tax. Political asylum seekers, people that are here as dependents of the government seeking political asylum, they have to pay income tax. And sadly, African Americans who were never actually granted their state citizenship or their state status after the Civil War have to pay income tax unless they correctly plead their civil rights, their equal civil rights. And last but not least, and this is how they snooker everybody and get this crap through the courts, federal corporations have to pay income tax. In fact, the word income, if you look up the legal meaning of income, you'll see that income is a corporate accrual. They're admitting right there that only corporations can have income. So an income tax is literally a tax on corporate income. And you say, what the? I've never made a dime. I'm not a corporation. I have no corporate income. Well, I'll tell you how they do it. You go into a bank, and they demand your Social Security number, which you've been bamboozled into applying for in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And that grants them the presumption to believe that you are a federal employee, because only federal employees are eligible for the Social Security program or one of these other groups that I just enumerated for you. If you look it up in Title 42, you'll see that Social Security was set up as a federal pension program, and that technically you've never, most likely, ever been eligible for it in your life. But you were told that you had to have a Social Security number in order to have a job in America, which is also a lie and a piece of disinformation of major proportions. And so you applied for and received a Social Security number, which creates the presumption that you are a taxpayer and that you are an enfranchisee, that you have agreed to have your name incorporated and to operate as a corporation of the federal government. None of which is ever disclosed to you, none of which is ever explained to you, and all of which is a really gross adhesion contract. But this is what they do. This is their mill. This is their fraud scheme, their little moneymaker. They set up all of these corporate franchises, and when you go into a bank and you set up a bank account and they demand the Social Security number from you and you give it to them, they set up what's known as a personal bank account, a personal checking account, a personal savings account. You've heard this all your life, right? Your personal checking account. Well, guess what personal means and what person means in federalese? It means corporation.
Oh, brother.
So they set up a bank account for a corporation in your name. That's why on your checks, it's all caps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
All
so
right.
What happens? You come in there, innocent as the flowers in May, and you donate your paycheck to that corporation. Every time you put anything in the bank, in the account belonging to that federal corporation, it's 100% donation to that corporation. And since the corporation did nothing in exchange for that donation that you just made, it's a free gift. It's 100% income for the corporation. And that is what they tax you on.
All right, let me ask you this then. Is it true Social Security is and always has been a pension for government employees, and would it follow that that's why it's always broke and has been for so many years, decades, because of the huge number of government employees and that most citizens aren't eligible for it anyway?
Well, most, as I explained, technically, according to Title 42, the vast majority of us are not, never were eligible for Social Security. And that is the absolute truth. So we've all been enrolled in a government pension plan, but we're not government employees. And the only excuse that they can come up with for this is that they have run these franchises in our names without our knowledge or permission. And they are saying that we're employees of these franchises named after us, which of course is a bunch of bogus bull.
Right. Good Lord. All right.
And if you want some more proof that what I'm telling you is true, just look at your checks. Look at any check issued by any bank. Get out a high-power magnifying glass and look at what appears to be the signature line. And you'll see that it says authorized signature, over and over and over again in micro print, so fine you cannot read it with the naked eye. Now, why is that there? They are hiding the fact that you have been reduced to being a mere employee of that corporation that they have printed on that check. They're hiding the fact that it's not actually your account. It's an account belonging to a federal government franchise, just like, Dairy Queen has a franchise and Burger King has a franchise. Well, they have enfranchised you, your name, and they have deemed that you are an unpaid volunteer employee taking care of their business and their assets for them. And if you're not mad by now, and if you're not outraged and ready to go do something about it, I don't know what more I can tell you.
This is actually, it's beyond disturbing. But, everybody has sensed for a long time, that something was wrong. And the thing is that they never got any closer to an answer because there's so much confusion. And it is engineered confusion. Mm-hmm. Mr. Wayne was talking the other day about, look at your Social Security card. Notice how your name is spelled out in all capital letters? That's important. And it is, isn't it?
Well, I just issued I actually issued an order about it, a judicial notice of fraud and violation, and an immediate order to cease and desist, issued to all United States district courts and federated state and county courts operating on American soil, to all members of the American Bar Association, all members of the International Bar Association, and to the United States Congress, with copy to the World Court, The Hague, registered. Judicial notice of fraud and violation. That all capital letters convention is called GLOSSA. G-L-O-S-S-A, GLOSSA. From American Sign Language. Section 11. Subsection 144 and 147. The Chicago Manual of Style. Or Style. The use of all capital letters to express a name or other content. And here's the definition from Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. Example. Glossa viperina est coradit viscera textus. 11 Coke 34. Coke was a British source. It is a poisonous gloss which corrupts the essence of the text. Ever heard the expression, put a gloss on it?
Sure.
Meaning, yeah, right, well, this is it, a glossa. Okay? This is a language convention that, by its very essence and use, invalidates by fraud every contract and court proceeding that has been addressed using it. It is an act of personage. Personage is the crime of misrepresenting a living person as a corporation. And that's what they're doing every day in every courtroom all across America. They are misrepresenting living men and women as corporate entities.
Let me ask you this, Judge. I'm jumping around a little bit here because I know you don't have all day for us, and I'm happy that you're here at all. But when you talk about expatriation from the United States, what are the actual steps that must be taken to do this? And once you do this, are you then required to physically leave the country and go to a country that you have selected to expatriate to? Or what happens,
Everybody is afraid of expatriation.
I'm not. I just want to know how to do it.
Well, it's very easy, and no, you do not leave. They're the ones that have to leave. Thank you very much. An act of expatriation is actually pretty simple. If you give me a moment, I'll read it on air. It's just, a paragraph or two, and there's nothing to it. You just basically tell these animals that, no, you're not a United States citizen. And remember, citizen means that you're a federal official or employee and that you are giving your allegiance to the government and serving the government. If you don't want to serve the government, if you want the government to serve you, then you have to expatriate from that presumption. And, well, here's an example, an act of expatriation. And I want to, one of the things that isn't clear to people is that there's you, the living person, the living man or woman, and then there are all these corporate entities that have been created named after you. Okay? And you have to expatriate each and every one of them. Okay? It's not good enough to just say, I, John Michael of the House Danford, expatriate. No. That's just expatriating your living self from any presumption of United States citizenship. You also have to expatriate the straw men, all of these corporate personas that they've proliferated and used against you. You have to expatriate them back to the land too, because these are all commercial vessels. So, for example, right now, in addition to you, John Michael of the House Danford, for example, or Melissa Ann of the House Cummings, that's your actual living appellation, your proper lawful way to state a name, okay? You have a trade name, which might be Ann Elizabeth Johnson, okay, or Peter Mark Olson, okay? That's our upper and lower case with first, middle, last that we were all taught to use in grade school. That's a trade name.
Oh, brother.
All right?
Yeah.
So you have to expatriate your trade name. Then on top of that, you've got your all capital letters name, which might be Eric Mark Johnson, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you have to expatriate that. That's a Cestui trust set up and operating out of Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And then most recently, Mr. Obama created another whole raft of bogus franchises. And they're operating under just the first name, the middle initial, and the last name. And those are all bankrupt Puerto Rican public utilities. You like that? I thought you'd like that, but when you get your light bill, you'll see that it's addressed to your first name, your middle initial, your last name in all capital letters. And that's what that one is. You have to expatriate all of these different things that they've created and bring them back to land. You have to dry dock them on the land of your actual state of the union. Okay, so when you expatriate, you're going to expatriate all of those names. Okay? Okay, so what you need is an act of expatriation and oath of allegiance. Okay, so you would begin with whereas, and then you would put the name that you're expatriating, is a naturalized citizen of the United States under the diversity clause of the Constitution, and is of age of majority, and whereas such citizenship was never desired, nor intended, nor willingly, nor voluntarily entered into under conditions of full disclosure, the name willingly and purposefully renounces all citizenship or other assumed political status related to the United States, its government, a corporation doing business under various names, and it's all that were formed under the Act of 1877-78, and does repatriate to the land of his birth, known as the actual State of the Union, and does freely affirm his, capital letters, allegiance to the same actual and organic state of the Union, and does accept and reclaim his true nationality as an American state national and as an American state period.
Wow.
Okay, so this action I validate, certify, witness, and affirm this day of blah, blah, by, always use the word by, and then your trade name, upper and lower case, first, middle, last, all rights reserved. Now, when you do the notary witness on this thing, you want to pay attention to what you're doing, because most of us have taken the notary witness block on documents for granted. As part of the overall fraud, you have multiple organizations that are operating as, like in my case, the state of Alaska. There's the state of Alaska upper and lower case. There's the state of Alaska all capital letters. And most recently, there's just Alaska in all capital letters. And these are all foreign corporate entities that are here providing governmental services, and they're all operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea, and they don't have a damn thing to do with me, the living woman, or with my state on the land. Okay? Anytime you see the word of, you're talking about a corporation. And that corporation is operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea. Period. You can take that to the bank and shove it up their nose for me. When you're talking about the actual state, it's Colorado State, it's Alaska State, it's Montana State, as in Oklahoma State Capital. Okay, it doesn't say state of Oklahoma Capital, does it? It says Oklahoma State Capital. So that's the actual state. That's the state on the land that you are owed, that you are a national of. Okay, so when you do the notary witness, you set it up Alaska State, not state of Alaska. And you do the actual county too, which is done the same way. It's Clark County, it's Harrisburg County, it's Polk County, it's Ferris County, it's Snoqualmie County. It's not county of anything. When you say county of, you are, boom, you're right over the fence and into the international jurisdiction of the sea. You're no longer talking about the actual county. So when you do the notary witness block on these affidavits that are basically, acts of expatriation, you want to make sure that it says Colorado State, Montrose County. Okay.
Yeah.
Before this day, blah, blah, did appear, blah, blah, you did establish this act of expatriation and oath of allegiance. So you expatriate from any presumption that you are a United States citizen, meaning someone subservient to the United States government, okay, that you work for them or you are a slave to them, and you take your oath of allegiance back to the actual land, the actual soil state, the organic state that you actually are a part of and that you owe your allegiance to.
Mm-mm-mm. Are you going to maybe at some point in future offer an expatriation kit for people in various, let me put it another way. If you were to put together a kit, would it apply to a person in any state, or do they have to be tweaked slightly per state? There you are. I was concerned.
Well, they really, really don't like it when we start talking about effective means of exiting their little box.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that I've got a good computer here, and I get the color wheel a lot. I get anomalies I've never even heard of before, and I'm just happy to get you back. I was a little concerned when you just dropped off the scope like that. I was just gonna ask you, Judge, if you were to offer an expatriation kit, would you have to have 50 different versions of it, or would one kit do for anyone in any state?
The only difficulty, the only difference is for people that really are United States citizens. And at the present time, the only way that they can expatriate and gain standing on the state is through an equal civil rights claim. Now, I want to point out, somehow America slept through the civil rights movement. I don't know how, but they did. Nobody asked, what are civil rights, and why are these people rioting over it? Nobody bothered to look up civil rights in a law dictionary all across this nation. I think I was probably the only person who felt stupid and did. Civil rights are rights that are conferred by Congress. They are granted to you by Congress, and they can be taken away from you by Congress. They're not natural. They're not unalienable. They're just a nod from Congress saying, okay, well, we'll give you equal civil rights. And people should then think, equal to what? Okay. What's the standard? What are they trying to be equal to? Well, they're trying to be equal to the natural and unalienable rights that are owed to American state nationals, to the people who were born here, who are one of the free, sovereign, and independent people described in the Definitive Treaty of Peace, Paris, 1783.
Yeah, they really don't like that sovereign citizen title, but go ahead.
Well, no, there's no such thing as a sovereign citizen. And it's an oxymoron. You can't be a sovereign and a citizen at the same time.
There you go.
Just explain, when you're a citizen, you're subservient to the government. When you're a sovereign, the government works for you.
Mm-hmm.
So they're mutually exclusive. Anyone who uses the term sovereign citizen is either, insulting your intelligence, or they're truly not understanding what they're saying.
Well, Judge, you're the only one other than myself I have ever heard say unalienable. Everybody says unalienable as if we're going to be alienated from our rights, man. It's like, no, you cannot put a lien against these rights. They are unalienable. My compliments, ma'am.
Well, thank you. It's an admiralty issue, so it's unalienable.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that, no, they cannot come after your rights. Your rights, by the way, are a material interest. Your rights are more precious than gold. And they, in fact, are what protect your property and your gold. So when somebody comes after you and tries to convert your natural and unalienable rights into merely civil rights that are granted to you, whether they're equal or not, they are taking you down a pathway you don't want to go down.
Mm-hmm.
So, but unfortunately for those people who are verifiably United States citizens, which means everyone who hasn't expatriated and basically put the lie to what they're claiming against you, everyone that hasn't been recognized as a state national, which is all African Americans, all people of color in this entire nation, have never had their natural and unalienable rights recognized by this foul, stinking government. In fact, if you take a look and really, really look at their vaunted 13th Amendment, which is supposed to outlaw and abolish slavery, you will see that, in fact, it does no such thing. It institutionalizes slavery instead. Now, you're going to look at that and you're going to be fooled, like many, many people have been, if you just do a cursory reading of it. The 13th Amendment to their corporate constitution abolishes slavery except for what? Criminals. And then it leaves the definition of criminal to the Congress.
Wow.
Right. So they institutionalized slavery, and then in the next gasp, in the 14th Amendment, you'll find that they defined a criminal. The criminal is the person that they create in your name. If you are a United States citizen under the 14th Amendment, meaning one of these corporate persons that they just arbitrarily created to benefit themselves, you are guilty by definition the moment you walk into a courtroom. And the only thing left to argue is how much you're going to pay or how long you're going to be in jail.
Well,
so they set themselves up a real racket here.
Yes, they did. It's a good one. Seems to be coming apart at the seams, but they find a patch for it every once in a while. Allows them to go down the road a little farther. I have time for one more question, and Judge, it is this: can this be reversed? Can this nation be restored to what it was intended to be, or is it all just too late and nothing short of a Mad Max scenario combined with a French Revolution, a little touch of the French, just set the whole place on fire and then do that forest fire thing? Oh, look, brand new green shoots are pushing up from the blackened floor of what was a forest. I mean, what do we do about this? Can it be done?
No, this is just a bunch of criminals. And they're operating as corporations. Corporations that operate as crime syndicates can be liquidated. Period. Now. I mean, there's nothing to be afraid of. I want you to seriously sit down and imagine 390 million angry Americans.
Mm-hmm.
You think there's anything that's going to stop us from reorganizing our country the way we want to?
Only Jesus himself could stop it.
Well, yeah, but that's about it.
That's about it. I
mean,
wish he'd come back today, frankly.
You know, we've got 390 million people, and there are 515 responsible for this mess sitting in Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. itself is being liquidated as a corporation because they're insolvent.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, come on, folks. Let's just do what needs to be done. Let's make it clear to the entire world, including those fools that have been perpetuating this unknowingly, and the rats that have been doing it knowingly. Let's just let them know the jig is up. It's over. You are done here. You have to abide by your contract, and that's it. And it doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says. The Supreme Court is vested in the one people's Supreme Court, the real Supreme Court,
all right,
not in the U.S. Supreme Court.
I extend an invitation to you to come back on the program, pretty much any time you want, and we'll get into more detail and inform as many people as possible that this country has become a Chicago-style mob fiefdom, and it can be brought under control. But first,
oh, please don't insult the Chicago mob.
No, I think they're already doing that.
The Chicago mob, they're choir boys compared to the European sludge that has crept upon our shores and done this.
I knew Capone was all right. I'm kidding you. Judge, it's been a real pleasure. And let's stay in touch, and you keep punching and stay healthy. And I look forward to meeting you up in Dallas one of these days.
I'm going to come get that dinner.
Come on. It's waiting for you.
Okay.
God bless.